Good afternoon. Actually, great to see all of you here. There is a powerful play going on, and I'm sure you're all aware. We all recognize the distractions upon us. We're being told that we are no longer shepherds of patients' health, but a team of providers. Surely, we recognize that medicine is nothing but a dollar sign through the eyes of the elite, through the eyes of the experts, politicians, and some of us who have turned to the dark side of regulatory capture. And the term public good is nothing more than a means to command and control. Surely, as the day follows the night, the healthcare system is overburdened, it is overutilized, and it is overcharged and darn near collapse. So, to commoditize medicine, one has to eliminate the product differentiation. You know, from a beautiful bouquet of colorful stuff to this gray, drab, wilted weed. And so what happens is you make it ubiquitous, available to everybody, you cut the margins, and you make it cheap. It is the first and unkindest cut of all in a marketplace. It changes the value proposition of a consumer. And who is the consumer? All of us. We're all patients. So here are 9 ways to commoditize medicine. Whereas from the 5th century BC, Hippocrates through William Osler, and most recently up to 10 years ago, we were called doctors. Stands in Latin, by the way, for church fathers, educators, advisors, and scholars. And the doctor has been long immortalized in prose and poetry, in annals and tomes, in sickness and health, in life and death situations, and also in most all forms of ritual and ceremony, because the term doctor has a built-in nobility in it. You see, it is a time-honored academic title in Europe. In the UK, a surgeon who has been ennobled, knighted, created a baronet, or appointed a dame does not get rid of the term doctor. But now, we are all providers. You know, NPs, PAs, nurses, home caregivers, technicians, transporters, housekeepers, doctors, all rolled in one basket. So the big divots in the doctor's psyche are from these self-proclaimed elites who now create massive algorithmic guidelines pseudoscience based on selective data. It is a way of control, cost control in the treatment of illness. It is no longer e pluribus unum, from the many one, the one, shall we say, innovator, the one creator, the one discoverer, but it is ex multis, of the many, one of the herd. So they rely on statistical data of the underpinnings of the 95% bounded confidence interval that translates to a p-value of 0.05, and thus by pointing the statistical nonsense, they fool even some of us, physicians, here. Because everything that is 0.05, oh yeah, is statistically significant. Is it? If you don't look at the data that goes into it, well, it's fraud. So even if you were to agree to that nonsense, you take the 5% who are outliers, because they don't fit in the bounded intervals, that translates to, and I'll say this slowly, 15,900,000 citizens of the United States. They are disenfranchised. So what do? We are told to choose wisely, failing which, what's the inverse? We're choosing unwisely, and therefore open to reprimand and a denial of reimbursement because you're doing something called critical thinking. They propose team of providers as a corollary to good patient care. And reasoned decision-making is relegated to the conditional fallacy of groupthink. What is groupthink? Nothing more than the loudest voice to suppress all others. No minority opinion, no challenges, just a consensus kumbaya. And you know, a physicist who got a Nobel Prize, Richard Feynman, calls it cargo cult science. Google it. You'll see he had a pretty good, it's a 2-page note. It's wonderful to read. So then we come up to number 3, the Sunshine Act. Well, what's the Sunshine Act? If a pharmaceutical company or any company gives you $10, and that is a gift, anything more than $10 has to be reported to the government so that they can keep a transparency. Well, in this opaque world, the wheel of governmental fortune, if you look at it, from number 2 to number 7, they're all politically appointed hacks who have little speculation behind their eyeballs, who consider delay, obfuscation, misinformation as important, weighty business. And like drunkards, they all look for the keys under the lamplights because their closed minds cannot stretch the imagination. They always want to look at the keys that they probably lost under the lamplight when there's a whole lot of darkness out there where the keys might exist. So what do these experts do? Well, let's look at a few things that they blame us for, which is costs. So the total cost in 2012, a healthcare cost was $2.1 trillion. And based on their data dump, you all know about the data dump? Yes? You should. Based on their data dump, the total amount of money paid out to doctors directly was $77 billion. From CMS's $985 billion expensed in health care, 77 was a direct pay to the doctors, which translates to 7.78%. And a Keynesian Brit, sorry, 7.78%. So a Keynesian Brit, you know, he's now in Harvard. His name is Malcolm Sparrow. He says, well, I suggest that $500 billion were built out of the $2.4 trillion in healthcare costs in 2013. But here's the rub. If $77 billion were paid to the doctors in 2012, if you double that number for non-Medicare income or revenue, we are still left with 500 minus 154 equals $346 billion. Where did that money go? They won't tell you, I'll tell you. So if you take that $154 billion out of $2.7 trillion in 2014, that translates to 5.7%, which means that out of every $1, only 5.7 cents is a direct revenue for the physician, and that includes the fixed overhead costs. And now here's the other side of it. Who's robbing who? Listen to this. A Forbes article recently estimates that $361 billion of the healthcare costs are strictly from administrative purposes. Well, hello there. So then we come up with EMRs. Well, EMRs are created by and for the insurers and regulators. They are, in my opinion, and I'm sure in Richard's opinion, they add complexity, reduce efficiency, and exacerbate the cost. This is the progressive drumbeat that is taking the soul out of patient care. And about HIPAA, it's still intact. So if a cyber junkie goes into your EMR, guess who's toast? So you see, you must know about this. 50% of all installed EMRs are by this company, And this lady, her name is Judith Faulkner. She happens to have an increase in her net asset value from a few million to close to $2 billion in the past 5 years. And she hails from Madison, Wisconsin, and she was a big bundler in 2008 and 2012 elections. I'm not going to tell you who she went for. So she goes on to say, they're like kids showing up at the door asking for Oreo cookies. Guess who the kids are? So what goes on is very simple. They throw these distractions at the doctors. We're supposed to major in these minor activities, where the major activity is nothing less than patient care, which is relegated to something not so important. So when you throw enough mud in there, some of it will stick, and most of it will blind you. And all these little things, along with some of the additional acronyms, are just there for us to throw minor activities at. So the psychobabble of the elite continues. They say bad doctors. Well, there's no denying, none of us will deny, that there are a few rogue doctors among us, as in any part of society. I mean, there's no purity in anything. But when you get 7 pages on the Google search for bad doctors, something is out of frame. Something is critically wrong. So what they do is they call us doctors providers, scientists, when it is about good medical care, when it is about innovation, when it's about creativity in advancement in medicine. But when they are really trying to drive the nail in, they call us doctors when they're levying charges of fraud and crime. So if you ever get a chance, just get this book called The Criminalization of Medicine by Ron Libby. It is really worth reading. And what it shows you is what has actually happened in one of the surgeons who went to jail for 10 months for a minor mistake. And I'm sure the AAPS all know about this unfortunate event. And see, minor coding issues are called fraud nowadays, and they put doctors behind bars for that. And now they also want us to, all physicians, to have fingerprinting, just like the criminals would. So this blame game keeps going on. Now here's the story. We're all hardwired to make mistakes. It is, to err is human, to err is universal, but to err, it is not an intrinsically bad thing. It is not, because that's how we learn. So why is this blame game going on? Success and failure spring from the same psychological roots. Errors are fundamentally useful and adaptive things. We are error-guided creatures. Errors mark the boundaries of the path towards successful action. James Reason, 2003. And if you ever read a book called Anti-Fragile, the author Taleb offers that small errors make us resilient, and that prevents big catastrophes. Yet, the blame game goes on. So I borrowed 3 slides from my FAA talk on human factors and decision making. And so the NTSB looks for 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. And so what's to be done about it? So if you were to do the probability analysis, as in evidence-based medicine, and you come up with the potential of who, what, when, where, why. So when I ask this question to 100 pilots at the meetings, some say, well, the cause probably is another aircraft with the propeller going into the back of this aircraft causing this damage. Some say, well, it could be because the aircraft was not properly secured and it kind of hit some tree or something like that. And a third say, well, it could be the pilot's wife. She got ticked at him and took a baseball bat to it. If you were to believe the probability analysis of this as an evidence-based medicine, your safety recommendations would be, well, you should follow about 200 yards behind another aircraft so that you don't plow into him. That's the first safety recommendation. The second is to make sure that you secure the lines pretty good. And the third recommendation would be give her a credit card while you're flying, for crying out loud, you know? And you would be wrong in your safety recommendation because the culprit is a moose. So the answer would be a moose-proof fence. So what does the government do? The government comes up with something called the Doctor Data Dump of 2012. Non-contextualized nonsense of box plots and whiskers of outliers is nothing more than to force and raise the ire of the public and the patients. So just for a second, let us look at the context behind this dump. And you look at these 6 subspecialties. Now, the 2 subspecialties I'll point out to, one is ophthalmology, which made about $327,000, and hematology oncology, my specialty, which is they made $366,000. So then you say to someone, why are these people getting so much money? It turns out 70% of the hematology oncology guys is based on chemotherapy drugs. As we pointed out, the drugs are expensive. And so if you take the 70%, you'll get whatever is left. In ophthalmology, a single drug, Lucentis, brings in about 40% of the revenue for macular degeneration. So if you don't know the context, all you're trying to do is make people get pissed off. I'm sorry to use the word. Am I allowed to do that? Thank you. So, yeah. So what I did is I looked at, as it turns out, Obamacare, by the way, the 2,700-page tome is nothing more than drafted by health insurers, and that came out in the Washington Times. In 2006, 10 U.S. health insurers controlled 114 million patients serviced by 500,000 doctors under contract, right? That number is up to 180 million now, and that's serviced by 550. In 2013, the average rise of the medical management salaries rose by 50% from 18% to 221%. So what I did was I did probability and probability log graphs on SPSS. We all know what that is. So this is the first cohort that went from 18 to 37%. Second cohort went from 59 to 82%, and the third cohort went from 138 to 221%. What's interesting is that if you want to constrain your salary as an administrator within one standard deviation, you're going to climb the ladder really, really good. Did you get that? There was some humor in there, I think. Anyway, so, but here, I can actually create a box plot too for these jokers, and that's exactly what that looks like with a huge outlier out there. So the next step is more telling, which is William McGuire, who was the CEO in 2005, made $8 million from United Health. Currently, United Health has $87 billion market cap. B with a billion, right? Billion with a B. Larry Gassock made $5.2 million from WellPoint. WellPoint has a $34 billion market cap as of yesterday. John Rowe made $3.1 million from Aetna. Aetna has a $29 billion market cap. I'm going to name 2 others. One is O'Brien, Dr. O'Brien, who made $4.8 million in his severance golden parachute thingy from University of Massachusetts healthcare system, while the healthcare system was underwater for $55 million. Isn't that great? The other person I'd like to point out is Christine Cassell. I'm sure Dr. Kempen was going to be talking about this in detail. But I just want to tell you that she made $786,751 for she was the president of American Board of Internal Medicine. Well, that's great. And she also was the one who pushed the agenda of the MOC, the maintenance of certification. In 2009, ABIM's cash reserves, net cash reserves, was $17 million. Do you want to hazard a guess what they are in 2013? $134 million. And you know what? Maintenance of certification is nothing about patient care. It is nothing about physician knowledge. It's all about the almighty dollar. And if you don't believe me, look at this graph. The growth of the administrators, this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Growth of administrators is 3,000% versus physicians, flatlining out in the yellow. So in 2013, 11 health insurer CEOs have now jumped up and made an average of $11.3 million a year, Medscape data. So you see, the question is who's watching who's guarding the guards? And a little known proportionality here, if this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and CMS. If you look at the physician payment, 15 years, it's down by 0.6%. And the real value means inflation adjusted or buying power. A surgeon who made $185,000, now that's worth $161,000. As you know, nobody's got a raise here. So the rage of this machine, if left unabated, will surely consume us all. We must, as citizens, we must, as physicians, disassemble this machine. So I'm going to leave you with this 2-minute video, and I hope you enjoy it. Question, oh me, so sad, recurring. What good amid these, oh me, oh life? And the answer, that you are there, that life exists, an identity, that the powerful play goes on. And you may contribute a verse. That the powerful play goes on. And you may contribute a verse. What will your verse be? There is a betrayal of conventional honesty in the scientific, financial, medical, and legal world. And we are constantly losing liberties under the pernicious guise of safety and security. So I'm going to ask you this question one last time. What will your verse be? Thank you.